Okay, let's start by defining retention. Before we can really define retention and measure it and improve it, we need to know what it means to be an active user or a churned user. What does it actually mean to retain somebody? So your definition might look something like this. To remain active, a user must do X every this time period. So if we look at this example here, we have somebody who's active and there's a 30-day time period, and in order for them to remain active, they must open the app. So how can you define an active user? Well, first you need to define your retention action, and then you need to define your retention frequency. So to determine your retention action, you need to find an action that's connected to your core value. And these are actions that are correlated with retention and LTV. It actually is probably going to be very similar or maybe the same as your activation action. So some examples are Amazon making a purchase. They're probably looking to see if people are making purchases month over month. Uber taking a ride. If you haven't taken a ride in a long time, they're probably going to consider you as a churned user. But a very good place to start is simply a visit to your website or app. Next, you want to determine your retention frequency. So you need to ask, how often does somebody need to use my product to maintain a habit? So for this, you can look at historical data for patterns. For example, you might see that users who haven't performed an action, like a visit to your site, within 30 days are unlikely to return. And you can also use your intuition. Think about what the ideal usage frequency of your product is. So for example, you can look at offline comparisons. Let's say you're a news app. If you have a news app, then probably it's going to be every day because people get the newspaper every day. For Udemy, I like to think of it as being similar to a book. And how often do you purchase a book and add it to your library? Probably once a month makes sense. And finally, you can also confirm with industry stats online. There's a lot of data online that shows how often people use certain types of apps, and that'll give you a good baseline. Once you have a definition for an active user, you can track active user growth. And so some commonly used health metrics you've probably heard of are daily active users, weekly active users, or monthly active users. And this is actually a function of acquisition, activation, and retention, as you can see here. You have new users coming in, you have churned users going out, and then you have reactivated users coming back in. We'll talk more about this later. So to solidify this a little bit more, let me share what we do at Udemy. We track monthly active users, and we define activity as a visit within a 30-day period. If an active student visits within a 30-day period, they'll remain active, otherwise they'll be churned. We also look at retention and churn rates of actives and reactivation rate of inactives, which we'll learn how to calculate in the next lecture. When you're thinking about retention, you also need to think about engagement. These users may be active, but the question is, how active are they? Retention is a binary metric, so they're either active or they're inactive. There's no in between. Whereas engagement reveals the depth of their usage. So if we look at some active users, we can pull them out and see, okay, it looks like these are monthly active users, but 70% of those monthly active users only visit once or twice, 1 or 2 days within that month, 25% 3 to 4 days, and 5% 5 or more days. Those users are not the same. So why is engagement important? Well, first, it's linked to retention. The more a user uses your product, the deeper their usage habit is ingrained. And it's linked to business value. Power users generate more value in terms of transactions, ad impressions, referrals, and more. So you really want more of these users. Okay, let's recap. Create a definition for retention so that you can measure and improve it. Define retention by defining an active user. And you can do that by determining your retention action and your retention frequency. And remember, when you're considering retention, you should also consider engagement.